Alrighty, so now we've got some basic lighting. I turned some things down just to save us on some time. Still not too bad though. But now I actually want to let's bring this down a bit so you can see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding some interior lighting. I'm going to pause this for right now. So let's close you up. So we can assume by the image outside it's daytime, but even with daytime, curtains somewhat drawn and, depending on how things are, you're still going to have some interior lighting. And I personally love receded lighting, the lights that are kind of stuck on the insides. So this is a great example of where I could put some receding light tubes inside of here that are going to bounce around and start to illuminate my room and give it some warmth. Now, the lights that actually work with Arnold, um, we can see direct light, point light, spotlight, um, cylinder, disc, quad, and we'll go over what those. Those are connected to the area lights. Photometric, which is where you'd have an IE file that's actually going to project that realistic little light effect coming from like a sconce or something. And a mesh light, which is where you can convert an actual object into um, a light. So in other words, if I made a donut in this case, or a cylinder, or even a light bulb itself, I can actually convert that into a physical light source. They're not the most accurate, but they're really nice for when you're getting specific weird shapes, like if you have a neon sign with writing or something like that that you want to create. The only lights that are not supported, the Maya lights that are not supported by Arnold are ambient lights and volume lights. So we're not going to use either of those. Um, but we could see what the differences are, color temperature, whether you're using color or not, um, and exposure of what that actually does to get a different effect. So whenever you have a chance to, going to solidangle.com and looking through the light source, they are really good with nice breakdowns of different things that you can use and different settings. It's an excellent resource. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Arnold Lights, and I want to create an area light. Now the funny part, if I press 7 in my scene, it'll take a second for it to calculate. There we go. I'm going to scale this guy up, and you'll notice it's not having any effect on anything because I have no exposure by default. So if I start cranking that up to like 15 or so with the scale of the scene, we could see that now, at least in the hardware version, we can actually see its effect. Were I to just update, we can now start to see the highlight changing based off of that. So just a couple of things on the area light. The area light is, as its name describes, it affects an area. And you could say, well, don't all lights do that? And to a certain degree, yes. But the area light actually, when we see this little plane with a line coming out, that's the direction the light's coming. Unlike every light, the area light actually, based off of its scale, affects the area that it's hitting. So the bigger the area light, you see how things are getting brighter. And it actually comes out at an angle similar to a spotlight, though we don't have the cone. It also has a built-in quadratic decay to it, which means that it's automatically decaying away from the surface. The visual inside of the scene is not 100% accurate of what you're going to see in the render because they're calculating differently. So in other words, if I increase my exposure here to like, let's say 50, hello, maybe not 50, let's try 20. We could see that area light's really illuminating that area, and as I pull it down, we could see it's only affecting where that edge of the surface of the area light is and downward out at an angle. And were I to scale this down, it's going to start to affect a much smaller area. Now this is great for fluorescent lights and things like that, but it's also really good because we can actually modify some of its parameters, including the shape of it. Right now it's acting like quad lights, you know, like 4 lights that are there. I could change it to a cylinder. And now that cylinder we see here is like a fluorescent tube. Okay. Let me pause this because while I'm changing things and it's updating, it slows everything down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this down and then I'm going to elongate it like a fluorescent tube. And if I throw this up here, like so, give it a nice balance, there we go. Say that's my receded lighting. And don't pay much mind of how it's calculating in this view. This view is a hardware view. We're rendering software. And so if I turn that on right now, we could see that that light is illuminating that area up there. And it's going out in all directions. It's giving us this hot edge on the inside and a shining light downward. And before I start duplicating this and putting it, excuse me, to the other angles, I want to get it the way I want it first. I could use temperature, and what you'll see is as I change the color of the temperature, like lowering it, it gets warmer, right? That's kind of neat. If I go to the other direction, it's going to get cooler, like that blue soft white light. But it looks very cold when you do that. I want to warm things up. So I'm going to use the temperature, but I'm going to bring it down. Oops, a little too hot there. Looks like having a disco party, so let's crank it up a little bit. We want it warm, but we don't want it to, we don't want to, you know, we don't want a discotheque either. So now I can also start to adjust, because remember this is going to add to each other, right? So every time I add a light, all the lights are going to be applied to each other to illuminate a scene. So if I have one that's super hot and I duplicate it 3 times, then they're all going to be on top of each other. So what I want to do is I want to kind of control them. Let's try 15, maybe a little bit higher. We'll see. Maybe like, wait for it. Maybe like a 17. That looks nice. We might go a little higher than that, but I'm just trying to see what it looks like. And remember, I'm going to have these duplicated. So you have to kind of look at what is the look you're going for. And rather than me having 4 all at once, I like to do 1 first and then go from there. So that looks kind of cool, like that. So if I pause this now, and now I'm going to duplicate it, And what I'm going to do is, because it's doing the old chuggy chuggy chug chug chug, um, press 5, 6. Come on, there we go. And now I'm going to take the duplicate, move it over here. Take both of them. Oops. So make sure I only have them selected. I'm going to duplicate them. Oh, jinkies, I hate when that happens. So fine, we'll do one at a time. Make sure I didn't, yeah. So dupe it. Oops. Bring you over here. Dupe it one more time. Bring it over here. That might give us what we want. So now let's see what that looks like. Ooh, I like that. That's looking pretty sweet. So I'm starting to get this this nice receded lighting coming from the ceiling. That's kind of cool. If I want to vary things up, I might even make this top piece a different color, like um, just so I can have some more breakup in the room itself. Now, of course, this is still pretty sketchy of how it's actually doing it. And this might be the good time where you start to go in and you do a quick check in the render settings and boost up the diffuse and the specularity to see what that looks like um, as a better render. Now, of course, once again, whenever I go into those old render settings and I start to um, do stuff of that nature, what we're going to see is that things are going to start to take longer. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. So I don't want to always like, oh, let me do a big test to see what it's like. Um, what I want to do is actually start to just baby step it up. Lighting takes the longest of all the stuff. And if I was doing it at nighttime, of course, I would change up the colors and intensities. But it's a process of building up. And you start with what your primary light source is, and then you start to try and get that right. And then you add on to it. Now, if I wanted a more strong light coming through here, then I might also add an area light pointing through the window to intensify the light coming through there so that I could focus it more. But we could see it's still, that it's starting to get to where we want. And then it would just be a matter of cranking up some of these settings to get the renders. You do a test at a much smaller resolution, and then when you're ready to spit out your high res, then you can crank it up and boost this up to an HD 720 and then see what that looks like. But it's going to take a little while, and then if you're feeling particularly like, oh, I'm about to go grab lunch, then crank these puppies up. The ones you want to do is like just to see what it looks like, you know, the diffuse The subsurface scattering is, for the curtains, boosting that up. But the camera you want to be careful of because this will multiply everything. Right now we're just multiplying the things we want. But this gives you a good idea of just starting to build up on that and going step by step. So it's still rendering out right now, but you can already see that it's starting to clear up. We're getting better lighting inside of here, and like I said, it's a process. We would continue to fine tune and make our adjustments.